connect people with expertise in various facets of co-ops and cooperative business with other people in the community who want to learn about that. This is our May edition, Fairness Workshop, Fairness and Compensation. That's not the actual. The Austin Cooperative Business Association works to improve the environment for co-ops in Austin, making it easier for co-ops to form, work together, collaborate, and advocate on improving cooperative housing and business conditions. Anyone who's interested should get involved. We have a lot of committees. We do a lot of work to try and promote co-ops and co-op development and co-op working conditions in the city. So we also, if you are able, we encourage people to donate $5 for these workshops. You can do that online or in person. If you'd like to make a one-time donation, or if you'd like to join what we have called the Cooperation Club, the Cooperators Club, you can go to acba.coop./join. And the Cooperators Club is a way for people to do monthly donations to support the functioning of ACBA and ACBF, and help keep these events going, get more infrastructure and support for Austin's co-ops. And if you join the Cooperators Club, you get different benefits like stickers and posters and things like that. So we really encourage folks to do that. So for today, Watson is Vulk Co-op is going to be talking to us about compensation and cooperatives and equity. So I'll let you, before we do that, we can just let the other ACBA folks introduce themselves. Ryan Nill, also on the board.
You want me to say something about myself?
Sure.
All right. I'm Ryan Nill. I'm on the ACBA board. I guess there's a camera there on the computer. I'm on the ACBA board. I focus a lot on the housing cooperative, housing advocacy work. So I'm often at City Hall trying to convince the city councilors to make it easier to build co-ops, to modify the land development code to make it easier to build co-ops. Also talking to folks about funding co-ops and accessing like affordable housing bond money for cooperatives. In addition, I'm always looking for folks who might be interested in starting housing co-ops. So if y'all are interested in that, you can email me at ryan.nill, that's NILL, @acba.coop. Thanks.
And hi, everyone. I'm Carol Fraser, and my main function right now at ACBA is helping run this workshop series that brings you the workshop we have today. So stay tuned for more. We have another one in July, converting your business to a co-op. So stay tuned for information about that one. Enjoy.
All right. And now, without further ado, we're going to be talking about fairness and compensation with Watson. So if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thanks a lot. I'm Watson with Vulk Cooperative, and we're going to be talking about fairness and compensation today. The agenda is going to be distributed justice, and then we're going to talk a little bit about game theory. So that's going to be the problem of fair division, and then we're going to go to an example. We're going to have some breaks here, and we're going to have a discussion at the end of each portion here. All right, so distributed justice is the study of the ethics of making allocations that separate out, let's say, wealth and opportunity to the general public. And we're going to be reviewing a bunch of philosophers in order to tease out some of our presuppositions about how we do distributed justice and property and some things like that. So Jeremy Bentham is an English philosopher, 18th century, who is the founder of utilitarianism. And utilitarianism really is the belief that a moral action is just if it maximizes the benefit to the majority. And one of the things that utilitarianism assumes is consequentialism. So, and that's really that a moral action is the justness of the moral action is going to be based on the outcomes. So that's where we get the phrase "the end justifies the means." Then we have John Stuart Mill. So within utilitarianism, there were some issues, then notably rights. Jeremy Bentham believed that if you just maximize utility for everyone, you would naturally come up with rights, things like freedom of speech and everything like that. And they kind of found that within the colonies and other places, so on and so forth, you don't really come up with natural rights. The majority tends to beat up the minorities. And so we have John Stuart Mill, another British philosopher, 18th century, who was really somewhat of a student of Bentham, who took the utilitarianism and augmented it. So it's like utilitarianism 2.0. So you have natural rights, which are inalienable rights. You've heard some of this language before. It's like very much baked into the U.S. Constitution. Natural rights occur in the state of nature, and they occur before consent. And then they can't be revoked by society. Some examples of natural rights would be things like freedom of speech, some of these things that you hear all the time, freedom of conscience. So that's just being able to have opinions on morality. And then, freedom of religion and assembly and so on and so forth. And a very important one is the right to property. So, and then I'll explain some of these things. So state of nature is really, because we're going to go into some of this later, but state of nature, it's really a hypothetical, say, condition where you're contemplating the lives of individuals before they enter into society, like before society exists. So it's before there's governments and all of this stuff like that. So the belief is that there are rights that happen that government didn't give to you, they're inalienable. And then he has a concept of property, and I believe it's something along the lines of, when he's describing it, is that you own your own faculty, so your own cognitive faculties, the ability to think. You also own, or should have, the right to the produce of that faculty. So if you do things like plant some corn or something like that, you own that. You have the idea for that. You can own that, and then you also own the right to get a price on a fair market. And then together together with that, you also own the ability to give your produce from your faculties to whoever you want. So that's really, and then an easier way to think about all of that is you can mix labor with the physical, and then that's kind of what private property comes from. Our concept of private property is more from John Stuart Mill than anyone else. Okay, and then we have our old friend Aristotle, who is a philosopher in the classical period of ancient Greece. And he was more preoccupied with teleology, which simply means it's really an explanation of phenomena in terms of its purpose versus how it was caused. And he's also, within that, you get into issues of virtue, which would be a quality that is moral or desirable in persons. So if you're being virtuous, really, and I can probably get some more participation at this point. Here's a question here, which is a famous one from Aristotle, but who should get the best foods. And if any of you have ever heard this question before, but I'd like to, ask who do you think should get the best foods?
I haven't heard this question before,
Yeah.
but is this referring to like the instrument?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, my first impulse is the people who play them the best.
People who play them the best, and then that would be a virtue from Aristotle. Best flute players have a virtue of being able to play. They should get the best flutes. Things should be distributed based off of honor, right? So when this goes into the politics, which is one of his more famous books, the people who should be honored are the people who contribute the most. And so this is also a way of distributing, right? And he's more interested in honor and over money, things like that. And then we've got Immanuel Kant, who's 18th century German philosopher who was an arguer or proponent of deontological ethics, which simply means ethics, the morality of an action should be based off of a system of rules and not off of the consequences. So there's consequentialism, so that's where you get the ends justify the means, and this is more of the means justifies the ends. Right? He's a contractarian, which means that there's some type, whatever morality or system of morality that you come up with will involve a social contract in some way. And then he's the author of what's called the categorical imperative, which is a universal and binding sustainable rule, which does not depend on, and this is his definition, does not depend on the inclination. So basically what that means is, like, for instance, lying. You should act in such a way that if everyone acted that way, it would be sustainable. We like that word in the cooperatives, right? So lying would be a thing that if everyone lied in order to increase their self-interest, then the world would break. So that would be something that would fit within, that would be a categorical imperative. And he's very important with, like I said, within deontological ethics and contractarianism. And then we've got John Rawls, American philosopher, 20th century, probably the most important political philosopher because of his work on the theory of justice. So he has something that revolutionized what lots of philosophers used as a starting point, which was the state of nature, right? That hypothetical condition. He upgraded that. The first thing he did was come up with an idea called the veil of ignorance. So basically, whenever you make a moral decision, social decision, dealing with some issue, you ought to put yourself in such a place to where you discount or forget your personal attributes. So when you're saying, I'm going to make some type of moral decision, I'm going to say, if you're in a higher stature within society or lower, you ought to discount that and not think about that. And you should make it to where it would be, you're kind of trying to become less biased. And then the original position is a position that is behind the veil of ignorance, where you can imagine it, and the easy way to think about it is imagining that before you're born, you're able to create a world however you want to make it. But you don't get to guess, or you don't get to say the attributes that you are going to acquire when you're born. So anybody who's maybe played a role-playing game, you've had to roll your character. Okay, and you're rolling your character, you can say something along the lines of, oh, okay, this one has a 10 of strength, this one has a 3 of dexterity. I'm going to go ahead and keep this character. This is kind of the inverse of that. You get to roll the world, but you don't get to say what your character's attributes are. That's really what the original position is. And so when you're in the original position, John Rawls says this is a place where you can make fair assessments of a structure of society. So you get together and you're trying to reason with each other about what's fair about society, how it should be allocated, distributed. Then you should do that from original position. And then also another very important kind of intuition of John Rawls is the intuition of non-arbitrariness for distribution. So basically, whatever system you come up with, if it's going to be fair, the distribution should be the way that you distribute the goods, the wealth, or the opportunity should not be arbitrary. So it shouldn't be the case that, I want to make a system and I just so happen to be a great, race car driver. Well, now we're going to make a system where race car drivers get rewarded millions and millions or billions of dollars or something like that. And if you were doing that in some way, then you were having a problem with your system. It's not fair. You should be behind the original position, behind veil of ignorance, that type of thing. So now we're going to talk about some of the things that we learned a little bit in the philosophy. So we had the Ford Pinto. I don't know if you guys ever, my older sister had a Ford Pinto, right? So the Ford Pinto had a lot of problems. One of the problems is that it would detonate if it got hit in the rear, right? The gas tank was in the back. Okay, so what did Ford do? Ford did nothing. So we had Ford Pinto, 1970s, fuel tank exploded if you had a rear collision. Ford did a cost-benefit analysis, and they said that the cost to add a special shield essentially is going to be about $137 million. But let's calculate how much people are worth, the injuries to those people, and how much it would be. It's about $49 million. It's not worth it. So we're not going to add it. This calculation appeared in court, and then the jury said, you will be punished severely. But Jeremy Bentham would be fine with this. This is utilitarian. Okay, we're trying to maximize the benefit, and we're going to have to somehow come up with a price. So first thing I guess we should probably talk about is utilitarianism. What do you guys think?
I actually know about this situation. Come closer to the mic. I mean, I think you got to define what you're maximizing. What's the benefit? The slide you had earlier said pleasure.
Yeah.
And is it fair to assume that $1 is equal to a unit of pleasure?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think if you're going to use the utilitarian framework, I don't necessarily think that dollars are the best unit of measure for determining like what is the highest utility. Not that I have any like recommendations for what's better, but I think that's an obvious flaw here because like we know that like a death of an individual causes like obviously the end of a life, and there's lots of suffering for all the people around him, and that is probably greater than Ford's 100,000 shareholders who will lose a couple pennies on like the stock value for like having paid out the 137 million, right? Like the impact is more distributed amongst more people, and it's like much smaller versus like a much more extreme impact on an individual. And it's not, I don't think you can assign dollar values to that, or it's very difficult to assign dollar values to that. This is based on like insurance costs, and the insurance providers aren't like assigning those like kind of social values and kind of like emotional values. They're just looking at like dollars.
So you kind of say that maybe utilitarianism can be recovered if you use the right value. Okay. Anyone else? Any views at all about this? I mean, what do people generally think of? There's lots of, this one is an old example, but if you remember the Ford Explorer situation, it was kind of the same thing.
You really don't like Ford.
It was kind of the same thing with, but they offloaded it and said, no, it was the tires, it was Firestone. Remember? It's like maybe, I don't know, it was like 2007.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard. I think the thing that people are the most upset by with that type of calculation is the idea that you can, that, like, I think there's a general theory or a general folk theory or whatever, just a sentiment people have that comes from lots of different influences in Western culture, that human life, at least, and maybe other types of life, are like beyond valuation. Like, you should think of them as like a thing that you should, like, you should never compare them to a shield on a car. Like, like the right to life is inalienable, and so like you can't do this. Like, if you think it's gonna, at the same time, it's, I mean, but that's not good enough, because at the same time, if like that number was 2 people, then, and it was like $100 billion.
Yeah.
Like, it was, and it's still like you're still doing a statistical proportion thing. Like, it makes it even harder.
Yeah,
But,
that's where so this is, you have John Stuart Mill, who said, no, you're not, you need to have inalienable rights. And so he did a little caveat. You have these rights, no, you can't just do things like this. But it seems like at some point, though, the numbers that you were saying, surely, but this is what you said, surely 2 people are not worth billions of dollars. So you have kind of a number. You're defending.
well, I mean, that's the problem with it, right? Like, at a certain level, it's like, okay, yeah, but like, let's say it's $1 trillion. Like, let's say 6 people level of money.
I love it.
You know, so then, well, then you get to the point of like, okay, there's a certain amount of money that valuing, like, if you don't put anything to it, there's a certain amount where like it would wreck a lot of other things.
Yeah.
Like, if Ford went out of business completely because of how much they had to spend to do this, then it's kind of irrelevant because they did it anyway. But they lay off like hundreds of thousands of people, and it would like devastate communities, and like that alone would increase like death rates from just health impacts and like mortality, like, you know. So
yeah, I've got you.
It's complicated.
Well, so you're kind of somewhere in between Bentham and Mill, where Mill says no, there are certain rights. No, you don't get to. That's not about utility. That start out. But you can kind of come up with some very morbid situations to where you can put high numbers. So if it was torturing a baby for fun, and there was let's say Walmart became a valuation of $1 trillion, and Sam Walton said, I want to torture babies for fun, and I'm going to give my whole, worth, the trillion. You think how much good you can do with $1 trillion, but just let me just torture one baby for fun. That's why I want to do it. And then Mill has a way out. He's like, no. But Bentham would be like, well,
I'll consider it.
so much. That's a lot of money.
Can we pick the baby?
So that's where I think the Mill probably wins, because you can continue to come up with things. But practice, we put a number on lives. If it is billions, then no, we're not going to put the super foam in the car that'll keep you alive, but will make cars cost $500,000. If you get in an accident, we're not doing. No, we're just going to let.
Is that a thing? Is there foam that'll keep anyone?
I'm just thinking of a movie where they have foam in the car. But no. Everyone having parachutes in a plane, things like that. I think that's for a different. So there's another discussion, and we can take a break. But property and feudalism. Can anybody?
Want to take a break here and then
after this?
After this.
Yeah. So feudalism. I'm going to make it simplify. Let's say that there's an island. It's about 700 miles, and 100 people. 100 people own the whole island. They fought. They got their buddies together, their families. They fought for this island against invaders, and they beat everyone off.
Are you talking about Great Britain?
Yeah. and then they own, right? They essentially own this island. How is it that, or what system would you come up with where, or maybe you wouldn't care about, people owning 100 people, even if it's 1,000 people, owning this island, and then they're say renting. Let's say if you're going to live on my island or live in my portion of the island, your first couple of days are going to be whatever it is that you farm or produce that belongs to me. Then after that, the second half of the week belongs to you. Okay, this just said that that's feudalism. How do you go from that and that conception of property? Right, they fought for it, died for it, whatever their families did. How do you go from that to some situation where you can kind of deny this feudalism? How would you do that? Open question. I mean, we've had the different conceptions earlier. I can throw some things in. John Stuart Mill believed that with a conception of property, he believed that you had to leave with that conception that you had to leave enough for other people to do things. So he believed in efficiency and things like that. But so he has his way, but what do you guys think when you're reasoning about?
So are you asking like how would we
what would you
transition
do?
feudalism to like any system
Anything.
that we want?
Or if you want to, maybe you don't want to. You think it's
That's
fine.
fine.
Yeah.
I would say mugging people doesn't guarantee the right to 10 generations of lands.
Okay.
I mean, conquering territory is not. That just means you murdered a bunch of people who took their stuff. Like that's not good enough to justify anything.
Well, let's say that they were hunter-gatherers, and then groups came in, and then they were getting killed, and then they said, "Wait a minute, we're going to kill these people that are coming in and trying to, at the expense of our own lives." Right? So we're doing the hard work, and that kind. Let's put it in that. Try to put it in the best light as possible, if we can. So
are you saying though that within this society, it's territorial essentially?
Yeah. So there's dukes, earls, and everything. There's a monarch, and they said, "Well, I don't want to look over 1,000 or 700 miles. I'll have my kids look over 25 miles each. Let's do it like that."
I mean, you could do it as a lottery. You could say, divide up the whole area and into squares, and everybody's name gets in a hat, and whichever name gets drawn, that's the plot that you get.
Yeah. Who's doing that though? Like, how would you implement it?
Like politically or administratively?
Yeah, all things considered. All things considered.
No one's gonna want to give that up. And also, like I think you're talking about like the non-arbitrariness, like that if you're going to develop a system, it shouldn't be arbitrary about like who gets what. I think a lottery would definitely fall into like an arbitrary, and like people will not think that that's a just system.
Well, but if you're doing the veil of reason, like the fairest thing you could possibly do is just like for any distribution of power is like random sortition. Like there's no whoever wins in the end has nothing to do with anything that had any sort of bias or any sort of thing. It's just whoever gets it, and you can do it in the random number, which is not necessarily the most efficient way of doing things, but there's components that you can.
Yeah, the question is what happens after you do that, I think. But like once people start using their land to do whatever, are they really using it the most efficiently? Maybe not everyone's would.
Who says they need to? I mean, like, maximal efficiency doesn't have to actually be how we make political decisions. I mean, if we did, then we could do a lot of horrible things. It's okay for people who want to grow potatoes and hang out. There's no reason they shouldn't.
Yeah. Anyone else? This hard problem. I'm glad someone did it for us.
So I'm actually, ironically, I'm actually reading a history book about this.
Mhm.
It's called Millennium. It's like the history about from like 900 to 1100 Europe. And one of they talk about like the idea of like this is kind of the period where the idea of separation of church and state happened. But it's also the point where the feudal lords decided that they couldn't keep splitting up like their land between all of their children, because then you would have many different factions in like much smaller territories. So it actually made it more violent.
Oh, yeah.
So the solution that they did is like they came up with the I only know this in Spanish, the primogénito laws, like yeah, right. So like the firstborn gets it, and then it maintains the size and it becomes stable, right, over generations, because or at least more stable than like having to like fracture it into like 7 every generation. So I know that's part, at that point in history, that is what they did. You made it bigger and bigger things until like it's no longer an individual that can control it. It outgrew like any one person's ability to handle like control.
To maybe take a break, or you guys want to keep going?
Yeah, like
Break, 5-minute break. All right.
It's a lot to think about.
So I don't think it's gonna pick us up unless we get closer for like the future discussions.
Okay.
Is that the mic?
This is a mic. Yeah, this is the mic, and that's a mic, and then that's a mic. So I can cut out the breaks. Like that's not a big deal. But yeah, I think if you actually want to pick up the conversation, we should actually sit at the tables with the mics.
Because there's more discussion portion.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So we should move, which is like where I stood was about as like far away as I got. I thought would be reasonable to stand and talk to the mic.
Wow, probably Amanda's a snooze with her friend.
They'll be coming in.
No, I'll be heading off whenever they're done. Whenever they get through their hour wait.
5-minute break. Okay, we're back.
All right, second portion, we're going to be talking about the problem of fair division within game theory. So this is going to be a more rigorous view of how allocations are made and fairness. One of the things, whenever you're talking about compensation, that pops up, people say that you can't make a system that's perfect, or you can't make a system that's fair. It can always be gamed, can always be exploited. It's actually not true. There's such thing as within game theory, within the study of fair division, there's such thing as a fairness procedure that has guarantees. And so with these guarantees, you can make it to where there are certain allotments, and we're going to talk about all these different terms. There's certain allocations, and you as a player within the game, you can guarantee that for your portion, that they have certain properties, no matter what anyone else does. No matter how hard they try to exploit the system or whatever, they have certain guarantees, and we're going to talk about those guarantees. But this gives you a reason to avoid being myopic, which is, again, about the subject. People will just say whatever system comes to mind. It's what you could call a bike shed. Basically, there is no, everyone's opinion is just a strong opinion, but there's no real right answer. There are some answers that are more right than others. So we're going to talk about some of these components here. So within game theory, there's a concept of rationality. There's going to be a couple concepts that we have to talk about first, and then we can get into fairness for the components. But rationality just simply means making decisions that align with your preferences. So to make it simple, if you like apples and you don't like oranges and you're hungry, all things considered, when you choose the apple, that's a rational decision. You don't choose the apple, then that's an irrational decision. So that's within game theory, that's rationality and irrationality. It's not like pure Aristotelian logic. So then you have the allocation. That's simply a distribution of goods, and then each person gets a portion. Okay? And so then you have objective facts within fair division. Some objective facts are allocations, valuations, basically anything that can be recorded, that's objective. So if you can talk about it and record it down, then it's good. These are the building blocks of the fairness procedures. And then there are subjective elements, and those are the things that are hidden. So an example of let's say a hidden or a subjective component, let's say that you have a daughter. This is a classic case within psychoanalysis. You have a daughter, she likes strawberry cake. Does she like the strawberry cake because it tastes good, or does she like the strawberry cake because she likes the way you act? She's eating the strawberry cake. Don't know. It's a hard thing to figure out. I mean, why do people like different foods and different cultures and all stuff like that? But that would be, as long as it's hidden, that would be something that would be a subjective. The causes of your preferences. So now, components of fairness, you have proportionality, you have envy freeness, you have efficiency. We're going to talk about all these, manipulability, which is what people always or seem to be preoccupied with when they're talking about fairness, and then equitability. And this is going to lay the groundwork. This is a framework for talking about fairness instead of using the less rigorous language of something being flawed or non-perfect. We can use these terms. This term is a term that comes up all the time. Whenever you talk about fairness, somebody is going to push back and say, do you mean everyone gets the same thing? Right? That's egalitarianism, that's proportionality. We have a word for it within game theory. And within the allocation, it means that every player gets one hand. So if you have a pie, split it, 3 players, they get 1/3. That's proportionality. We can just say that's proportionality. not talking about proportionality, if that's what we're talking about. Then you have efficiency, and this is something that's important for really just Americans. We're preoccupied with everything being efficient. We really do not like it if there were 3 people and we're all hungry and there's a pie, and you split that pie in 4, and you hand it out 3 pieces and there's 1 piece there left. We don't like that. You're not going to accept that. It could be that you randomly give the piece away. It could be whatever, but we absolutely will hate you if you leave the pie, if you leave that piece. So efficiency within game theory is, they have a definition. It's when an allocation, so the allocation is the description of all the portions, right? So all 4 people in this class, or all 3 people. When it's Pareto optimal. Fancy phrase, Pareto optimal. Has anyone seen the movie, what is it, A Beautiful Mind? Anyone? No?
I know it's about that.
You know,
The founder
it's
of
about,
game theory,
yeah.
but I haven't seen it.
Well, he's a very important figure, not the founder. Von Neumann is the founder. But Nash got the Nobel Prize for things inside of game theory, right? His Nash equilibrium is what the movie got wrong. It made up something about birds, but that's not Nash equilibrium. Nash equilibrium is very much related to Pareto optimality. So if you have an allocation, it's a way of talking about fairness or efficiency. If you have an allocation, everyone got something, right? You measured it out. It's that allocation is Pareto optimal if no other allocation exists where one person does better, everyone else does at least the same, right? So it's a fancy way of saying there is nothing left on the table, okay? So that's what Pareto optimality means. That's efficiency. Then you have envy freeness. That simply means if you have an envy free portion or allocation, one player believes that their portion is tied for the best portion. It's just what they believe. Okay. And then you have manipulabilities, what people are really concerned about. So if you have a fairness procedure, the way that you separate out things and give the allocation, if there's some way to increase your portion, fairness procedure, based off of knowing someone else's preferences, that's how you hack fairness procedure. So, for example, a very simple fairness procedure is cake cutting, right? So if you have 2 kids, you can say, one of you cuts the cake, the other person decides what piece they're going to get, okay? That's cake cutting. Not necessarily envy-free, so I'm allergic to cherries, so let's just say I'm 5 years old and I just don't want the cherries anywhere near. Well, what the older sister can do is cut a big piece with the cherries on it, right? And they know I'm not going to pick that part. Right? And so that's manipulating the cake cutting procedure. So there's that. So knowing, and then you have procedures that are that don't succumb to manipulability. And then if you have equitability, this is the one that everyone wants to get to. That's a little bit somewhat confusing. It means that when there's an allocation, your portion, your valuation of your portion is the same as another player's valuation, their valuation for their portion. So this is an all things considered, took risk, you had opportunity costs, you had whatever, and then you're like, okay, I value this as much as you value your side. And it's also, you set out the rules before you even got into the situation where you did the equitability. So that's where you talk about consent and everything. So within fair division, there's really 3 ways to think about strategy. And this, it's a more rigorous way to talk about. So fair division itself, you're using a fairness procedure in order to get guarantees for those fairness components. There are different fairness procedures. Some of them are strong against envy, freeness. The ones you probably want are ones that are strong with equitability, these types of things. Okay. Then you've got altruism, where you know about the fairness components that we listed before, but then you purposefully ignore them for a loss. So this would be maybe talking about if you're in the majority, saying, we could get more if we denied natural rights, let's say, but we're going to go ahead and not do that. And then you have exploitation. This is more or less when you know certain preferences, like we said with the manipulability, subjective elements, and you use those subjective elements in order to subvert the fairness components for a gain, trying to maximize. So those are the different strategies. And now we'll talk a little bit about game theory. So different components of game theory. So let's play a little game called the HighLow Game. HighLow Game is when, let's say that we're going to distribute $2 million. If you can guess, and I have 2 words in my head, or 1 word, one of 2 options, high or low. Okay. If you guess the right one that's in my head, you get $1 million and I get $1 million. Guess the wrong one, and we both get nothing. Okay. So let's play. But guess who wants to play? Or what word is in my head?
High.
Okay. Anyone else? What do other people think?
Hi.
Hello.
Okay. You would pick low if there's $1 million on the line for you? Sure. The vast majority of people pick high in this situation. This is a well-tested game. And this is an example of what they call a focal point, selling point. Thomas Selling is the one who came up with it. But basically, it's a way of coordinating without ever communicating with someone else. There's certain features that people, for some reason, coordinate on before they have to communicate. And there's some, it creates all types of novel situations. But as far as within game theory, it's one of the things that it brings to the table when you're talking about trying to create new systems and things like that. So that's an example of game theory. There's another one.
What would you pick?
What would I pick?
You didn't tell us.
High. The vast majority of people pick high. I want $1 million, and I already know what people are going to pick. I don't think you would pick low. I think you would pick high too. But when the money's not really on the line, then people do. So here's another one. Really imagine this time that we've got a dictator and a dictatee. Okay. This situation, and we're going to kind of split people up into 2s. But the dictator is going to be, they have $100, and then they can split based off a percentage. The dictatee, that $100. They can pick whatever percentage they want. But if the dictatee says, no, I don't like that, then nobody gets any money. But if they accept it, then it's split according to that percentage. So let's split people into groups of 2, and then the people on your left, my right, will be the dictatee or dictator. Let's do it.
Dictator.
Yeah. Guys, ready?
So I have to pick a number. And you have to.
It's gonna be $100, and then the dictator picks the percentage of how they want to split, and then the dictator can accept or reject. So pick the percentage.
I'll pick 60-40.
And if I reject, nobody gets anything?
Yes.
Nobody gets anything?
Right.
But if I accept, we get it. Yeah, okay.
Is everyone done? Is everyone done?
We
Okay.
learned about this in psychology class.
Okay.
Or I think probably better than science.
So who's
Fastest level.
dictators? You guys all done?
They're still negotiating.
Not supposed to be able to talk. You can't negotiate. All right. All right. So who all picked 50-50? Who picked differently? What did you all pick?
60-40.
60-40.
I was playing 70-30.
Okay, 70-30. All right. So the vast majority in cultures that have a concept of money, anything between the 50-50 and the 70-30 can work somewhat. Around 70-30, 80-20, around there, people, there's a phenomenon that arises that's an irrational within game theory phenomenon where people will hurt themselves in order to hurt you. Even though, and they do this in places where they'll do it with $10, they do it with $100, but to them it's thousands of dollars. Within game theory, they call it a utility function. They want that money. It's a lot of money for them. It'd be the equivalent of us doing it with $10,000 or however much rich people in here care about, right? So, and they will deny it. They will say, no, it's unfair. I'd rather just not take, if it's an 80-20 an 80-20 split, I'll take the 2,000 or let's say 20,000. No, I don't want the 20,000 because I don't want you to get 80,000. No. And people will do that. This is the most tested game in game theory. They tested it in situations with lots of money, small amount of money. They tested situations where they're not. You will never meet this person ever again. You're not going to give them a lesson that when they meet up with you again, that they're going to say, okay, I better not mess with the person. No. They've done this in many different formats. And then this negative reciprocation, people have a concept of money. They deny it.
Is it like culturally, does it vary across countries or cultures?
They test it across countries. It's just that when there's a concept of money, when there's no concept of money, then then they don't have a concept of markets. And they're kind of like, oh no, we're doing this a different way. They have more of a cultural or societal bond or link, and then they do start to have more of a gift culture and some other things. But once people have this concept,
Does anyone ever say, does the dictator ever say like 40-60?
oh yeah, that the people will do in real situations. This is people not even splitting real money. They will do 80-20. They'll be trying to say, oh, I want 80% of this money.
Like the altruistic.
Oh, the other side? I don't know. Actually, I've not heard of that.
Mhm.
I've not heard of that. I have not. That's a good question.
Or do they ever test it with like, or is it just pure? It's like, okay, you don't know each other. Rather than like, oh, I
you
know
don't
this
know each
person
other.
can really use extra money and I'm okay. And
Yeah, you don't know each other. They have all these concepts. They call it poisoning, where the different concepts. You're never going to meet this person. They love to do it with college kids. You're never going to meet this person ever again. They do it in a situation where not only this person that you're meeting, you're not going to meet them again. You're going to play this game repeatedly. They're not ever going to meet anyone that you met and played this game with. They've tried it in a bunch of different ways, and and it becomes like gradually more and more strict where people do negative reciprocation. So it's an example of, this is an argument against people within, like, say, economics, who believe, okay, people will act rationally over the course of time. This is an argument where, no, it actually can get worse over the course of time. It'll be more and more in a situation where I'm going to hurt myself in order to hurt you. Right, so this is an example of irrationality. When you're making systems, it's important to think about things like this. I kind of think sometimes when people don't talk about pay, then it allows, I think this is one of the reasons why that's emerged. Because, you know, that it's kind of part of an ideology of not talking about pay within a regular corporate structure. It benefits people to, you know, because they will have, you don't run into negative reciprocation. Or it's kind of like, oh, this person is a fool and they're getting paid this much. I don't like that, right? Then, you know, or whatever. I just don't think that this is fair. You run into it less. So now, I don't know if you guys have grabbed some of these handouts, but this is the last exercise. So if you grab both, then we can do. All right. So you have on one side, you have the problem of fair division. And on the other side, you have the problem of distributed justice. Distributed justice is philosophy, fair division is hardcore, really microeconomics, game theory. So similarities between these two, there's concepts, and we went over them pretty fast. But there's some similarities, and does anybody note any of them? Anything jump out there to you?
Yeah. Sorry, between which?
This one, distributed justice and fairness. Yeah.
Oh, oh, there it is. So the question is, what's the similarities between some of these ideas?
Yeah. Anything that can be imported into game theory is kind of describing something in the philosophy side. Get another 60 seconds and then I'll jump on. What's
Like fair division and original position, kind of.
I think this is one with wrong answers because I don't find people talking about this in the literature so much. So, all right. Does anybody have any? You said, what was it that you said? Fair.
I'd say like the original position, like what what sort of society would you be pointing to in terms of equality and like fair division and fairness for peer and team components?
Okay.
I got one. The manipulability when considering the question about who should get the flutes, right? Because you're manipulating it based on people's preferences. Like, if you want to hear good music, then you want the best flutes to go to the best players. If you have no preference for good music, then you just want the flute for yourself, so you can like sell it for some other reason.
Okay. So the fairness procedure would be, I guess, the asking of the question who's going to give it. Okay. Okay. Anyone else? And this one is we went over it so quickly. So here we go. Distributed justice, distribution of wealth and opportunity. People are preoccupied with this philosophy. Simply allocation of game theory. Utilitarianism, preoccupied with efficiency. That is the thing that we all don't. We just will not accept that extra piece of pie. Absolutely not. It has to be further off. Right? Natural rights. Said a little bit about this earlier. You believe that natural rights won't really, you have to make a provision for them, and the majority, there's examples of majority saying, I don't like that natural right thing so much. Well, go ahead and violate those because I can make some money. Well, you're being altruistic in that case. I think that that's important to know. Contractarianism. Some of the things within contractarianism, it's preoccupied with consent. It's another thing. We're so close to it. We really don't really see it so much. But consent to a fairness procedure, when you decide to do cake cutting, you decide to do whatever, that consent is what brings moral worth. And then implicit contracts, focal points. Implicit contracts we didn't talk as much about, but it's a situation where, let's say, the moral value or the moral power from you're talking about the social contract, again, back to philosophy, they're not written in stone often. They're not explicit contracts, they're implicit. They're based off of reciprocation. So if somebody, we have precedent for that in law, if somebody's doing something for you over and over, even though you haven't written contract, whatever, and you say, at the very end, you say, we never said that I would pay you to mow the lawn, let's say. Like to say they were mowing the lawn and you just give them a little money every now and then, and they're mowing the lawn, they're doing it for years, and then they went and mowed your lawn again, and then you said, I'm not going to pay you. They could bring you to court. So reciprocation at that point, it's an implicit contract. And then the difference principle, equitability, based on valuation. So somewhat, I would say the difference principle is based on equitability, requires it. So then we can take a break now if you guys want. Get that along.
Yep. Yeah, no, I sat down and I looked at them, was about to eat one, and I'm like, no, that's a later thing. Because I don't want to have to try to cut this out.
Yeah, right.
right, final portion. Co-opensation systems. We're going to talk about compensation systems in general. There are 3 types of compensation systems, major compensation systems. Keep what you kill, or also known as eat what you kill. Gray hair or wise person, and then the point system. Keep what you kill is going to be the easiest one to implement. This is basically whatever you bring in, you basically are going to be able to keep that that project or whatever. And this is going to be more biased towards the services style firms. Gray hair is going to be a person with some type of seniority or what have you at the end of the year. It's going to be the one that blesses people with a bonus at the end of the year, trying to somehow create incentives. And then you have the point system, which is going to be more long-term. Within economics, it has a problem of what we call monitoring costs. It's expensive as far as labor-wise to maintain, but it's more objective. So some of the terms that we learned earlier about objective and subjective and everything like that, gray hair is going to be the subjective system, what have you. So we're going to go through this pretty quick. The point system that I put together here is going to be called a co-opensation system. It's based off of hours, sales, and it ignores seniority. Then the compensation system for people who are members or partners, very much based off of different point systems that, say, consultancies use, law firms, other types of consultancies, where they have a situation where it's basically a worker-owned entity, and so they have to figure out how to compensate people. So they have a lot of same issues that cooperatives can have when it comes to distributing money. So partners, members, they are the fundamental issue or problem you're trying to solve is how do you value that partner, that member? And so this system tries to create an economic value for a member. It takes into account associates, what we're going to talk about in a bit. It takes into both the wise use of associates, people who are friends of the either contractors or people who are potential members or what have you. It takes into account the value of the firm and the brand of the firm, the value of the brand and the firm itself. So, like I said, partners, people who have ownership rights, people who are members, they're able to vote, all this type of thing. The way that their points are created is based mostly off of hours, multiple types of hours that can be logged. So what we call responsibility hours. So account management, the stuff that people don't want to do because it's oftentimes not directly available to a client. Then you've got directly available to clients or working hours, and then you have however it is that you can do commission. So if somebody the rainmaker brings in a bunch of work, they get some type of incentive for doing that, right? So what are associates? Like I said, contractors or people who are potential members, maybe in the filling out period, those types of things. You need to figure out a way to use them or integrate them in a compensation system so it promotes a wise use of associates. And you've got firm hours. This is kind of important as far as firm hours are going to be hours that are kind of democratically approved. They can be something along the lines of, say, marketing. Okay, we're going to spend $1,000 a month on marketing. People can log towards those hours, and they'll be approved. They're already approved. So the system has to account for those, so you can include those into the algorithm. They're also not billable to customers. Then you have firm-wide realization. It's essentially probably the most important part of the compensation system. So it is a way of that within the algorithm to value management, also to value marketing, but probably almost most importantly to value opportunity costs or mitigating opportunity costs. And we'll talk a bit about that, and we'll talk about it here. So one of the things that happens, let's say you have somebody that's billing $350 an hour, and you have somebody that takes out the trash, right? Another member. The person that it's something that has to be done, okay? Like, so let's say that it's a thing that we say that it has to prove. I'm going to use the example of taking out the trash. Well, when the $350 an hour person takes out the trash, it's expensive, right? Expensive to you. So you want to incentivize other people to take out the trash, right? To do other things that are approved bill hours. When you do that, that's mitigating and allowing a person with a high bill rate to the rest of the world to go out and continue to do things. You're maximizing efficiency, maximizing not leaving things on the table if the person's out there doing their billable work. That's what firm-wide realization allows. It takes an assessment of the whole firm and then tries to min-max. Overhead, non-billable, non-approved. It doesn't mean that's something you don't have to pay for. So rent, let's say, that's not something that clients paying for. You're not billing them for that, and it's a cost. Let's say. And then, so we went through this. This is the actual algorithm. I'm not expecting you to understand it, but we have this in an Excel spreadsheet. If you want to plug some numbers in and play with it, try to break it. But this is the algorithm here on the bottom. And you have all the definitions there. So this last part we got through pretty quickly. This part is the discussion. What is it that you've got to see as far as compensation systems within cooperatives to make it something that's, the local discussion? What did you guys see?
I think other than your co-op, I'm the only other worker co-op representative here. And we just do hourly wages for everyone, based on a person's experience and kind of performance, and that's how we do it.
So who decides the wage?
Our operations manager sets the wages, and they're pretty consistent across positions. There's not a ton of variability. There's some variability based on experience and performance, but they're pretty narrow ranges.
Yeah. That would be the gray hair man. The wise person says you get paid this.
I worked at a worker co-op that split it egalitarian. 5 members, and they each got paid the same salary for the whole year. And then there were generally 5 contract workers every summer. It's a seasonal business farm.
Mm-hmm.
So all the apprentices, the contract workers, got paid the same as well, the same hourly wage, and we all worked the same amount of hours. But that was decided by the actual members of the co-op.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So those are democratically decided. So, anyone else? Anything?
What is Vulk?
We are keep what you kill, really. No.
We made this thing. We don't use it ourselves.
Yeah, but is this relevance of the formula?
It's pretty easy to do keep what you kill. It's really, really hard to say, okay, let's deny it. It's expensive. Time-wise, you want to log in all of your hours for everything.
Yeah, we have a time clock system.
Yeah. But the system is not really, this system comes from a book here. I'll go some references. Okay. So some references for everything that I grabbed in here. I've used definitely from other things, but What Money Can't Buy, Michael Sandel's really, really good. Everything that he does is good. Talking about distributed justice, right? The philosophy side. Fair division, cake cutting to dispute. Stephen Roms, he is the fair division master in game theory. And then the compensation systems. There's lots of information out there about systems that solve the hard problem of, there's law firms with literally 2,500 people who are partners. And so they have all these issues, and it's, it's interesting in the law firms. For people that know the law, they're not getting into a situation where they're like, oh, I'm not going to have ownership rights. No, we're going to do a partnership. And by bringing, if we make $5 million a year and I bring in a $5 million contract, no, we're going to be able to negotiate on how this is going to happen, right? So they have to deal with these problems in order to deal with the incentives and everything like that. And then we have papers on the compensation system here, multiple papers on it, but it's borrowed from the compensation plans for law firms. It's just upgraded to take out some things. So that's what this is all about. And of course, you guys know us in our Slack group and everything like that. That's it.
I have a fun compensation example.
Yeah.
Housing co-ops.
Yeah.
So no one gets paid, but you got a lot of people doing work, right? It took me a while to figure it out, but once I kind of realized what was going on, it was really obvious. And the saying, the bottom line, that's where you take your money as an owner.
Okay.
Right, in housing co-op, it's more like the top line, which is the income. Kind of take your profit up front by reducing the rent to the members. And then it's then you just basically how you decide the rent is your compensation. So and for a lot of places like my co-op, it's just 20 identical apartment units, so it's really easy to just say everyone pays the same. That's the egalitarian way. Everyone's supposed to do the same number of hours,
right?
And they pay the same amount of rent, and so you get compensated by the reduced cost compared to another living arrangement.
That's really interesting. As far as some of the other things that we've talked about in the past, there's a threshold for altruism for groups, and then it depends on how much work you're doing, right? So let's say, I don't know how much work it is. Let's say it's
4 hours
20
a week.
How many?
4 hours a week.
Okay, so it can withstand some type of superhuman doing a brunt of the work. There's a threshold where, say that it was, you said 20 units, let's say it was 10,000 units.
Yeah.
There's a threshold where you somehow have to figure out how to deal with the people who want to be free riders.
Yeah.
Right? They want to say, well, I like this low cost. I'm not gonna, whatever it is that you're doing. I mean, what the work is.
That's the conflict, right?
Right.
For sure. I mean, the work is imagine any property management company.
Okay.
A housing co-op is effectively a property management company organized as a co-op.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
And
Yes.
Every tenant is a property manager or a person in that property management company.
Are people doing similar enough tasks? Is
No.
that where it breaks down?
I think yeah. So the kind of the relative value, right? We definitely have an officer corps of skilled knowledge workers who get elected to positions who have to do things be the treasurer, make sure that all 20 apartment units are getting fixed up, have that kind of organizational capacity to hire people, figure out which members are good at fixing things, assign them to fix the things, and then figure out which problems the members who are good at fixing things can't fix, and then call a contractor to come and fix those. That's a very huge challenge.
Yeah.
And then the person who has to work with all 20 units turns into about 35 members. How do you assign the jobs to the people who aren't elected to jobs? Because obviously the people who are elected to jobs get assigned through elections.
Mm-hmm.
But then you've got the remainder, and then not very few of the elected positions fill all of their weekly requirements for their elected positions. So you got to assign them 1 hour of something.
Yeah.
And so that's a really difficult job. So yeah, a big part of the problem, and it's still distributed egalitarian, right? It's still 4 hours a week. Everyone pays the same amount. So there's kind of
Have you discussed changing it? Or is that something?
Yeah, it discussions happen. I think a lot of the fundamental things we don't talk about changing. We don't talk about So the things we have changed from this basic model is kind of the assumption that everyone's going to do 4 hours a week. That's kind of slowly become not true, and it's become not true in the sense that we give people kind of I think it stemmed from the reasonable accommodation for people with disabilities. Like we have to provide this as a reasonable accommodation, and then it kind of morphed into just like a reduction in hours as a reasonable accommodation. Like, you know, if we literally can't find more than like 1 hour for you to do, then that's fine. You can do 1 hour.
Is there a way to punish people who aren't doing their 4 hours?
Yes.
Okay.
They can get kicked out.
As long as you have that,
Yeah.
then it all
Yeah.
works.
There's the threat of losing your membership in co-op,
Yeah.
which essentially means you get evicted.
Yeah.
There's also like there is kind of like an inherent wage like baked into the system because there's fines if you don't do the work.
Yeah.
They're not very consistently applied because it's kind of like difficult to get to. People can like make up the time.
Yeah.
You know.
So I thought you were saying more of a volunteer. You know, of all the 20 units, you said 35 people. There's a group that volunteers.
No.
Then,
everyone is, you know, presumably held accountable.
Yeah.
And presumably, like everyone needs value.
That works. There's definitely within. I'm saying academically, there's. One would say, no, that's impossible. Like when you're saying it's volunteer, like okay, there's a threshold. The threshold thing is for volunteer.
Yeah.
Where you don't have to what they call coerce.
But this is paid in advance, like you're saying.
Yeah, like the payment comes from the fact that you pay low rent and you have all the benefits of the community and a stock kitchen.
It's more abstract than actual wages.
So there are examples of within field software. You said you use Audacity, open source software, where it is volunteer.
Yeah.
Right. And so how do you get it to where, you know, if you go back to the 90s, people say, oh, it's impossible to have anything that's valued. But they had to change literature to adapt to. There are ways to deal with large volunteer forces to do things that are significant, best in class.
Yeah.
That's it. Okay.
Well, thank you so much. Wilson.
Yes.
Thanks all for coming.
Yeah.
Good discussion. Yeah. That was really great. It's really interesting. So, can you send me when we do all the